Okay. How do you? Hello, dear. Hello, dear. I'm back with Brian again. Brian's here through Monday morning. Very grateful for his presence. And we're getting some stuff done together here, which is very cool. And one of the projects is Peace Pilgrim. And I had shared when I was with you briefly the day before yesterday that this has been in my heart to share. And so we want to do that. And I'd like again to start by inviting us all to center with the practice of Om. We can chant Om together 3 times. So if we can exhale completely and then take a nice deep inhale, breathing into the abdomen. And then this invocation. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvina Vaditamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. On below Satguru Shivananda Maharaj Ki
Jai.
And for all of the saints and sages of all the traditions,
Jai.
Jai. Okay, warmest greetings. So here's the intention. We'll be together here for about 30 minutes in this offering, and the intention is for 4 of these as a series. And the exploration is Peace Pilgrim's offering on what is commonly called the steps towards inner peace, and it's a beautiful way to relate to it. Of course, my purpose of being here with you and the retreats and all of this is really to help support our movement towards peace, towards inner peace, towards the great potential within us, freedom from suffering like this. And Peace Pilgrim is such a beautiful example and teacher for us of the path, of the spiritual path. In this first part, we'll take a little bit of time to introduce Peace Pilgrim, and primarily we're going to use her own words and her own style in order to introduce her. But I do want to say, not for nothing, that if you look carefully, you'll see above Swami's head that, honest to God, that is a pair of Peace Pilgrim's well-worn sneakers. Those were words that she would use, well-worn sneakers. And my goodness, these are, the best I can figure, these must have about 1,200 miles on them. She said that she got about 1,500 miles per pair. And these are pretty darn close to the limit. So they are literally holy sneakers. In every sense of the word. And I'll share briefly how these came, and you'll get it through part of the story of what we're sharing in this first section. I'll come to this. Many of you, but I know not all of you, who are joining us in this way have heard of Peace Pilgrim. And so we'll just share a little bit about Peace Pilgrim. As I said, we'll use her words for a good part of this. But here's this part. When I first heard of Peace Pilgrim, I heard of Peace Pilgrim as the pilgrim. Peace Pilgrim had walked on pilgrimage for peace. That's why the term Peace Pilgrim, that was the name that she selected for herself, given the mission that she was given. And she walked for 27 years. And she would say very clearly in the traditional way of pilgrimage, which pilgrimage is a walk to a place or for a thing. And she wasn't walking to a place, she was walking for a thing, and the thing is peace. And it is a walk in faith, and these operative words, it is a walk, it's not a drive or a ride. We throw around the term pilgrimage now. In India, yatra is a big thing, and it's a very important part of life and spiritual life, and we don't minimize it, but there pilgrimage would mean a journey. But here, really classically, the term pilgrimage is a walk in faith, carrying nothing, asking for nothing. And so the way Peace would say it is, I walk until offered shelter, and I fast until offered food. And then her big bright smile, and she would say, and it's always offered, aren't people amazing? And so there's an opportunity, if you haven't, we have a link below here on this piece to the documentary on Peace Pilgrim, one of the documentaries that has been prepared on her. And it's a beautiful documentary, and you can hear in her own words, which I highly recommend. So in order to do this, now this Swami walked for about 2.5 years, pilgrimage, inspired by the movement towards peace, the need for the movement towards peace. External peace, of course, but external peace cannot happen without inner peace. Inner peace is really the battle that we're all involved in. It's not about winning some position out in the world that we then have to defend, because there's no peace in that. It's really the movement to find peace that exists, that's already existent within ourselves, that is at our very center. And so it is a journey in a way, although it's an inner journey, so steps towards inner peace. And Peace would say that she lived in order to support the movement in all kinds of peace between peoples, within the family, in community, in cities, in states, in between countries, with the earth, and then in her own words, and that all-important inner peace. Now, if you really think about walking across the country, carrying nothing, and asking for nothing, if it doesn't freak you out, I'll give you a little, and Swami was very freaked out because I didn't want to do it. Taking you into the world here. And why? Well, I would testify that to walk across the Southwest Desert, and she started in 1954, January 1st, 1954, which was 1953, please forgive, which was during the Korean War time, and during the McCarthy era as well. And some of you, or in some cases, some of your parents or grandparents will know something about the McCarthy era. One of those also pretty challenging times in society. And so that's when she began. And she walked from Pasadena, California towards New York from January 1st. And I will testify that the walk across the Southwest Desert, which begins in Central California. So if you start walking in Pasadena and you walk east towards New York, you're going to walk through the farming country in Southern California. Quite lovely. And then you'll get to mountains before the Sierras, 6,000 feet, something like that. And as you begin to cross these, you reach the peak, you will enter the desert. And so the desert begins in south central California, traveling east, and then it continues. Well, Albuquerque is not actually called desert, it's called high plains or high desert, but and then continuing on even into the panhandle of Texas. And so practically speaking, you can fly across the Southwest Desert in in a couple of hours, hour and a half, like that. You can drive through it in a day and a half, like this. Maybe even a day if you're going really fast and you just keep going. But walking through it is 3 months. And I swear that water, which is going to enter your mind if you're thinking about water, might actually be the first thing that will enter your mind. Something like, what about water? And it did here, for sure. And so I even did some research into it early on before Peace Pilgrim had emerged, and I was able to take inspiration for Peace Pilgrim. And 3 days, an average of 3 to 4 days, walking 20 to 25 miles a day, which is a pretty good day walk, in order to get to another source of water, another town or village or market that would have water available. And so that's what I meant, this idea about walking. So 27 years. And never, there's not a single soul, and I met many, many beautiful souls that met Peace Pilgrim or whose parents had met Peace Pilgrim, met her at a church or a gathering, or she came to their house, or they met at someone else's house, or they met her on the road and invited her for a meal or to stay overnight. I met many, many, and no one has thrown any shade on their Peace Pilgrim and said, well, no, she really took rides. She was fooling with us. Not a single one. Now, can you imagine that in this society, in this time? Wow. And so she really did it. That's the point. Which means she's different. She's different than what we call the normal life, what we call the real life, silly us. She's different. She had found a wherewithal in her, and that's what she's pointing to for us, for our benefit. Now, dear Peace Pilgrim, there's a famous saying associated with Peace Pilgrim. There are a few. I'll give you one first, which is, if you knew the power of your thoughts, you would never think a negative thought again. We'll come back to that in section 3, I believe it is. And the other is the way of peace. And I don't know if you can read it here on the video, but above me is this quote from Peace Pilgrim: overcome wrong with right, falsehood with truth, and hatred with love. So the other thing I'll share about Peace Pilgrim is Peace Pilgrim had found the way to do this, the natural way to do this. It wouldn't seem to be natural for us. And we can have it as an ideal, but the actual doing of it, I went seeking how in the world would I walk across the country. And that's where Peace Pilgrim came in. And so I had walked Peace Pilgrimage across the country physically in 2014 and reached in New Jersey in the fall of that year a celebration of Peace Pilgrim's life and teachings in Egg Harbor, New Jersey. And so I was able to partake. Honestly, at the beginning of the pilgrimage, I figured I'd probably die walking across the pilgrimage, but transformations came, changes came in the inner world. Thank God. And somehow got there and met many people who had met Peace Pilgrim and had been touched by Peace Pilgrim. And part of the rest of that story leads us to how these shoes ended up in the care of this Divine Grace Yoga. So that's something we can talk about at one of the retreats if you're able to join. All right. So peace lived in this inner peace. She embodied it. She had found it. She knew about it. She knew the nature of it. She knew very clearly and could espouse the way that any of us could find it and imbibe in it. In a way, it's simple, but we would not say it's easy, as evidenced in modern times. But in a way, it's very simple, and the beauty of Peace Pilgrim, part of the beauty of Peace Pilgrim, you'll see if you follow us with this short series, is so simply, she speaks so simply, these profound concepts, she makes them easy to relate to and resonate with us. We, in every one of our Be Still and Know retreats, and some of you have joined, and so you'll know, typically Sunday morning is Peace Pilgrim morning for us in the retreat. And we do what we're going to be doing in this series. We take out the steps towards inner peace and we explore it together. We each will read a paragraph and we'll discuss it. And oh my God, it so deeply resonates with everyone. And really, there's no Sanskrit in it. There are no foreign terminologies or practices. It's just really common sense and approachable. And that is what inspired, that experience is really what inspired. I've got to sit down and share this with you in this way. And since Brian's here, we have the opportunity to get his support with it. Okay, so that's a little bit of the background of Peace Pilgrim. Now, she was in the place. She lived in the place. She shared the place. And she touched countless souls and lit fires within us. And it still happens. That helped us to burn away the suffering and to find what we're seeking inside. Some years after she had started walking, she was on a radio show doing an interview, and someone was listening to the interview and recorded it and transcribed it. And the interviewer asked her this question, and the question was, could you tell us the steps towards inner peace? And what we're about to read from, she spoke extemporaneously from the heart. And again, I'm trying to get a little of the flavor across, because it's really mind-boggling to our normal, quote-unquote, real life. This wisdom that's being shared and the love that is shared in the example and even in these words and how they're offered. They're just so direct and straight. She spoke first to the path. She spoke of it as her path, but we'll see it's really our path. It's something that we all are involved in already and will become more involved in as we move forward in life. And so we're going to introduce these, and then she began there, and then she provided 12 steps, and she would say they can be taken in any order. As you'll see, they're very straightforward. We have provided a link to this booklet, and there's also an audio book of it and PDF so you can download, and there's a version for Kindle, etc. It's very short. There have been millions of these copies that have been distributed, always free to this point. And it came from that talk. It's simply the talk, extemporaneous, recorded, transcribed, and then this dear soul who had done so gave it back to Peace Pilgrim. And then if you've ever seen a picture of Peace Pilgrim, you might see her, and I'll try to hold this close enough so that you can see that's her walking, and that's a tunic that says Peace Pilgrim on the front, and on the back it said 10,000 miles walked for peace. And the tunic had pockets. You might have even seen them in that photograph. And she would have some of these Peace Pilgrim booklets, Steps Towards Inner Peace booklets in the pockets. So in later years, she would give them out. Okay, let's let her talk. And this is really the beginning of her sharing, speaking towards spiritual path. Brian, if you could start us off. Of course. We'll read 5 minutes or something like that, and then discuss a little more.
Steps toward inner peace. In my early life, I made 2 very important discoveries. In the first place, I discovered that making money was easy. And in the second place, I discovered that making money and spending it foolishly was completely meaningless. I knew that this was not what I was here for. But at that time, this was many years ago, I didn't know exactly what I was here for. It was out of a very deep seeking for a meaningful way of life, and after having walked all one night through the woods, that I came to what I now know to be a very important psychological hump. I felt a complete willingness without any reservation to give my life, to dedicate my life to service. I tell you, it's a point of no return. After that, you can never go back to completely self-centered living. And so I went into the second phase of my life. I began to live to give what I could instead of to get what I could. And I entered a new and wonderful world. My life began to become meaningful. I attained the great blessing of good health. I haven't had a cold or headache since. Most illness is psychologically induced. From that time on, I have known that my life work would be work for peace, that it would cover the whole peace picture, peace among nations, peace among groups, peace among individuals, and the very, very important inner peace. However, there's a great deal of difference between being willing to give your life and actually giving your life. And for me, 15 years of preparation and of inner seeking lay between.
Jai. So I'll just add a couple of comments and then we'll continue on. Just to say, first of all, the beginning of this, when she's speaking of in my early life, that's not the beginning of her spiritual path, but it is the dawning of the realization that each of us are already walking our spiritual path. She'd already had experiences and she'd already had questions that would arise where there weren't satisfactory answers, where she had to dive within and learn how to ask questions inside, how to practice receptive silence, some of what she shares later, how to listen. I'll share an example with you. And this is, we don't really know the age, but she describes it as relatively young age. In school, she had, in her sociology class, small classes, the teacher had brought the golden rule into the class, and he'd actually brought a chart. She describes, sometimes you'll see a talk where she's talking about this. In all the different traditions, there's the equivalent of the golden rule. And so she listened to it, she heard it. It was really her first exposure to it. And of course, often we would hear in the West, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And in the Jewish tradition, it would be, do not do to another what is hateful to yourself, like that. But it's in every tradition. We see it in yoga, it's in niyamas, it's everywhere. But it clicked with her. She heard it, and the question is, well, that makes sense. Why doesn't everyone do it? And that became a real meaningful question for her, as it would for any of us. Do you notice that sometimes we get stuck in life? Something doesn't make sense, and we don't give up on it. We continue to try to make sense of it. Yeah?
Yeah.
And so that's preparing the ground for these next steps that she's describing. And then the other sharing, I'll just share this little story because it's a beautiful story about what she shares. She was exasperated with life. I'll just put it that way. Life didn't make sense to her. And you can ask yourself, where are you in this spectrum? Life didn't make sense to her. I mean, it was literally a real living issue for her. She knew how to make money, but it wasn't making her happy. And so it wasn't making sense. What am I actually here for? Was a recurring question at that point. And so she had this question about higher power and what is higher power that she'd already dealt with and made some inner discovery about that. And this hilltop experience is one night she had. Found herself near the forest and she decided to take a walk and deal with this question. And so she stopped and she made this declaration. She said, if you can use me for anything, please use me. I give you all of myself and I withhold nothing. And so you might get a feel in that of the sense of exasperation. It's like, this isn't working. We call this, in Sanskrit, there's a word subhecha, which is the first of the 7 steps of attainment of freedom or enlightenment or God realization or peace, complete peace. It is the point at which we begin to turn the life, and we've lost so much interest in the outer things and making money and doing this and going to the parties and the new stuff, the new clothes and the whatever. Swami has his own list. Everyone has their own list. And we each hit this point where it just doesn't. And some of us will enter very deep depressions. That's Swami, 3 years. Some of us will come through a little bit differently, but the turn is inevitable. It comes with vairagya, which is the beginning of dispassion, the beginning of disinterest in all the stuff of the world and all the repetitive stuff. And honestly, to the extent that we live our life in order to get something to make us happy, it's lunacy. I realized at some point that's the definition of insanity, to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. So we will naturally, and now she describes the next, and that's where she's begun. So I'll pick up here. During this time, I became acquainted with what the psychologists refer to as ego and conscience. I began to realize that it is as if we have 2 selves or 2 natures or 2 wills with very different viewpoints. Because the viewpoints were so different, I felt a struggle in my life at this point between the 2 selves with the 2 different viewpoints. So there were hills and valleys, lots of hills and valleys. Then in the midst of the struggle, there came a wonderful mountaintop experience. And for the first time, I knew what inner peace was like. I felt a oneness with all my fellow human beings, oneness with all of creation. I have never felt really separate since. I could return again and again to this wonderful mountaintop, and then I could stay there for longer and longer periods of time and just slip out occasionally. Then came a wonderful morning when I woke up and I knew that I would never have to descend again into the valley. I knew that for me, the struggle was over. That finally I had succeeded in giving my life or in finding inner peace. And this is a point of no return. You can never go back into the struggle. The struggle is over now because you will do the right thing and you don't need to be pushed into it. However, progress is not over. Great progress has taken place in this 3rd phase of my life, but it's as though the central figure of the jigsaw puzzle of your life is complete and clear and unchanging. And around the edges, other pieces keep fitting in. There's always a growing edge, but the progress is harmonious. There's a feeling of always being surrounded by all of the good things like love and peace and joy. It seems like a protective surrounding, and there is an unshakableness within which takes you through any situation that you may need to face.
The world may look at you and believe that you are facing great problems, but always there are the inner resources to easily overcome these problems. Nothing seems difficult. There's a calmness and a serenity and unhurriedness. No more striving or straining about anything. Life is full and life is good, but life is never more overcrowded. That's a very important thing I've learned. If your life is in harmony with your part in the life pattern, And if you are obedient to the laws which govern this universe, then your life is full and good, but not overcrowded. If it is overcrowded, then you are doing more than is right for you to do, more than is your job to do in the total scheme of things. Now there is a living to give instead of to get. As you concentrate on the giving, you discover that just as you cannot receive without giving, so neither can you give without receiving, even the most wonderful things like health and happiness and inner peace. There is a feeling of endless energy. It just never runs out. It seems to be as endless as air. You just seem to be plugged in to the source of universal energy.
And you are now in control of your life. You see, the ego is never in control. The ego is controlled by wishes for comfort and convenience on the part of the body, by demands of the mind, and by the outbursts of the emotions. How's that sound? But the higher nature controls the body and the mind and the emotions. I can say to my body, lie down there on that cement floor and go to sleep, and it obeys. I can say to my mind, shut out everything else and concentrate on this job before you, and it is obedient. I can say to my emotions, be still, even in the face of this terrible situation, and they are still. It's a different way of living. The philosopher Thoreau wrote, if a man does not keep pace with his companions, perhaps he hears a different drummer. And now you are following a different drummer, the higher nature instead of the lower. So in a few words, she gives us a bit of a picture. And if we can allow for, and I'll come back to that for a moment as we close this first session. If we can allow for the possibility that what she's sharing is true and correct, if we can just allow for it. I will share that time that she's speaking of, the 1950s, we would not say brighter than these times. We would say every bit as dark. If we consider these times to be dark and challenging and difficult, we would say every bit. In fact, maybe we would even say more so. War was going on. The Korean War was very much in pace. The Vietnam War was about to begin. The persecution of countless around the world based on belief systems and color of skin and all of this. There were movements happening, but very much a pace. And the whole buildup of nuclear arms. Swami remembers before Swami, little child, this birth, duck and cover drills. And if you don't know what that is, you can ask your parents about it. And so he grew up in school with this. So externally, no peace. Externally, no peace. And not a lot of hope for peace externally. Not in that time. Now, in the time that peace walked, actually there were changes externally as well. And I have no doubt that her mission, she played a role in this. But outside, it will continue to be a struggle. Inside, it's straightforward, and that's what she's sharing with us here. And what we see, again, if we allow for this, is what she's describing is attaining to this place that actually each of us are seeking, irrespective of what's happening outside, not influenced, not what's happening outside, in fact, became an opportunity for her to reach the kingdom inside. Yeah, and to share the way of the kingdom inside, which was really her motivation, was to share it. To share it. So, as we step through this, and this will be added to our Peace Swami YouTube channel, and I'll make sure to provide a link below if you're not familiar with it. It's a pretty cool resource. We've been exploring Bhagavad Gita and some of the Upanishads and books like Thought Power and Mind, Its Mysteries and Control, Mind Management, and Raja Yoga, like this. Beautiful discussions. And this will be added to these, so it'll continue to be a resource. But as I said, my feeling it's a very important part of it. The approach we take with these spiritual teachings, the classical approach, is very beautiful, very helpful. And it's a 3-step approach. Sometimes it's called the 3 steps or the 3 practices of wisdom. In Sanskrit, here's Sanskrit. Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana. Just means listen, contemplate, use the mind. Don't be used by the mind. This is an important point. Don't be used by the mind. Use the mind. And this is really much of what we're involved in this spiritual path and this connecting to the great potential within us. So utilize the mind in order to contemplate and then practice with, put into practice. And that's really the best approach that we can guide to in dealing with this or any of the spiritual teachings, is as we go through this, listen, allow, ask questions, and I'll make a point of reading and responding to anything that you note here. And there's the opportunity to message Swami, and I'm happy to, always happy. You can email me, or as long as I'm in this body, you can email me or call me or text me or whatever. Message me on Facebook Messenger. I'm happy with any of that, or WhatsApp. However you know how to reach me. Okay, so this is step 1, part 1, and we'll continue, I believe, tomorrow, maybe morning around 10 a.m. Eastern time. We'll step into the next one. And so
I do have one question that arises out of this teaching.
Yes, please.
Could you speak a little bit about the relationship between giving and receiving, giving and taking? Because she says early on, I learned to not to want to get anything, but to give everything.
Yes.
And then later she says it's a matter of receiving as much as giving.
Yeah. So that's really a walk through the steps, which will begin in our next session.
Okay.
And it's a great way to introduce the steps. So 12 steps, 3 categories: preparations for spiritual path, purifications, and relinquishments, like this. Mm-hmm. And we'll be coming back exactly to this, to what she's sharing. We'll be diving into the way she's relating to ego and intuitive nature, like this. And the relationship between our actions, the way that we act, the motivations for the actions, and what that does to us or for us. In terms of, there are 2 directions to go in life. Please forgive. Bondage, freedom. Only 2 directions to go in life. We say, when is it going to be over? What we mean is, when is the suffering going to be over? Is that right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Otherwise, why do we want it to be over? If we're not suffering, why do we say, when is it over? Yeah. So we call, in traditional yoga, we call suffering the fruit of bondage, that we're bound. And we'll often feel this, right? That I'm stuck. I'm bound in this situation. I'm in a ditch, something like that. I don't have control over anything important. Yeah? Someone else has the control. Someone else has the wheel. I don't. I can't do anything. What I can do, it's not meaningful. It doesn't make any difference. Yeah? Like this. So that's the example of what it looks like to live in bondage. And we'll explore what is the cause of bondage in a simple way that Peace Pilgrim relates to it. And then, what does it mean to be free? Well, she described for us. There's a movement towards freedom, which is inner peace, joy, love, recognizing that I'm constantly surrounded by love. Not just knowing it intellectually, but living it. Yeah? It's the end of the state of fear. It's the end of the state of separation, the end of the state of anger and judgment and retribution and discrimination and all of this. It's the opposite of it. It is living in the great unity. We call this freedom. And based on how we live our lives, we go towards bondage more so. And invariably, this isn't bad or wrong. It's not. It's not that anybody's bad. I'm not saying this. It is that not knowing better, we can live in ways that make us feel more suppressed, more in bondage. Yes?
Yes.
More oppressed, more victim. Yeah?
Yes.
But in the other direction, in a different way of approaching this life and living this life, then more and more free and that's what she's describing in her, until finally we live in the kingdom like this. And I think that's where we want to live. It's a great Rumi quote. Rumi says, fear is the cheapest room in the house and you deserve far better. And so like this. And there's a connection between how we live, how we choose to live, and this we have choice over. So great question. Thank you. Perfect. Leads us into the next section. And we'll chant Maham Enriching Jai Om Triambakam 3 times to close. And God bless us, everyone. Om Triambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushti Vardhanam Urvai Rukmeva Bandhanan Mritor Mokshya Mamritat Om Triambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushti Vardhanam Urvai Rukmeva Bandhanan Mritor Mokshya Mamritat Om Triambakam Yajamahe Sugandhim Pushti Vardhanam Urvai Rukmeva Bandhanan Mritor Mokshya Mamritat Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Ambalo Sakura Shivananda Maharaj Ki
Jai.
For all the saints and sages of all the traditions.
Jai.